All right, I want to get on to something else, Trita, with you, and that is the relationship with Iran. Look, it took painstaking diplomacy, years of negotiations for this Iran nuclear deal to be signed. Now the Trump administration imposes new sanctions on Iran for test firing a missile. And there's been some tough words coming out of the White House. Let's listen to the Defense Secretary, the new Defense Secretary, James Mattis. Let's watch.
As far as Iran goes, this is the single biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. It does no good to ignore it. It does no good to dismiss it. And at the same time, I don't see any need to increase the number of forces we have in the Middle East at this time.
Have we gone back in time here? These are tough words. Is it all going to unravel?
Well, first, when it comes to the sanctions that were imposed, they are not violations of the JCPOA. If the Trump administration had decided to go for some blanket economic sanctions, even if it had used the missiles as the foundations for that, it would have been a violation. But targeted sanctions actually are not a violation of the JCPOA. And the fact that that's the route that they went, I think is an indication that they're quite aware of the fact that even if
was the firing of the ballistic missile a violation?
The firing of the ballistic missile was extremely provocative, and it was quite foolish, I would say, by the Iranians. But that, too, is not a violation. Even Flynn himself used the word in defiance of the UN Security Council resolution, because the UN Security Council resolution says that it calls on Iran not to test any more missiles, which is different from saying shall not do it. So as a result, both sides actually did not violate the UN Security Council resolution. But if this is going to be the atmosphere that will surround the nuclear deal, then it's difficult to see the nuclear deal being able to survive in the long run, because it does need at least a modicum of desire on both sides to keep it alive. And I don't think that right now we're seeing much of a desire from the Trump administration to keep it alive. Several individuals there have made it quite clear that they would not like to see it alive, but they're also careful to make sure that if it falls apart, it doesn't fall apart in such a way that they will be blamed for it, because that would be very costly for the U.S. And that's part of the reason why I think we see some people using softer language when it comes to the deal right now.
But you're saying the spirit of that agreement has been compromised?
The spirit of that deal has been compromised, but more importantly, the deal itself cannot exist in a vacuum. It needs to exist within a context of a relationship in which both sides are trying to make sure that they avoid undermining the deal and that they avoid doing things that would undercut the deal.
Fred?
Well, I have to agree that these missile tests apparently don't violate the UN Security Council resolution, and it is typical of the absurdity of the Obama administration Iran policy. Iran can fire missiles if it attests they're not designed to carry nuclear weapons. Iran is the only nation in history to have missiles of a range of 2,000 kilometers or more without having a nuclear weapons program. These rockets aren't being built to shoot monkeys into space or payloads full of dynamite. They are a nuclear weapons delivery system. It's ridiculous. There's a resolution that allows Iran to test these missiles and not be in violation.
All right, Fred, I'm going to stop you right there, because we had a tweet from President Trump. This is what he had to say. He said, Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me. Then we have the Iranian foreign minister respond with his tweet, and he said, we will never use our weapons against anyone except in self-defense. Let us see if any of those who complain can make the same statement.
Well, let's see. About a year ago, Iran tested missiles and said Israel should be wiped off the map, written off the sides. The state of Israel takes things like that very seriously. They don't want a second Holocaust. They are afraid of Iran having missiles that can deliver nuclear weapons. It is my hope that this nuclear deal will be torn up when Benjamin Netanyahu visits the White House. It is a fraud. It does not stop Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons. It allows Iran to continue to pursue nuclear weapons technology by enriching uranium, developing advanced centrifuges. Iran will not allow inspections of military facilities. It is an out-and-out fraud. Either it should be torn up or substantially renegotiated.
Okay, very quickly, Trita.
Well, I'm glad Fred said that he wants to tear it up, because that intent is very clear, and it's good to know it. The deal actually has worked quite well. There's a reason why for the last year and a half there's not been any talk about how close Iran is to a nuclear weapon or whether the U.S. should bomb Iran. It's because this deal has worked. This has avoided both of those outcomes. The reason why we're talking about it again is because Donald Trump is president, and he said that he wants to tear it up. And as a result, we're back sliding into a situation in which the two countries could be gravitating towards a military confrontation. On the missiles, I have to say one thing, though. There is no international treaty that prohibits Iran from having a missile program. And that's part of the
MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime.
And
if Iran joined this, there would be restrictions on them building missiles like this to threaten the region.
The international system is governed by certain laws, and the UN Security Council, the United States is in complete isolation looking at this issue from that perspective. Iran is not a signatory.
Iran refuses to sign the NPCR.
And Israel refuses to sign the NPT and has 200 nuclear weapons. I would like to see you complain about that.
I don't know how many nuclear weapons.
So the issue is, yeah, of course you
Israel
don't know.
hasn't threatened to wipe Iran off the map.
But the issue is this.
Israel's surrounded by enemies.
All right, I need to get to our other guests. Adam, if we look at this difference that we're seeing with Iran here, look, that is a United States difference with a country that's been a traditional adversary of the United States. But it also has differences. President Trump has differences with allies like Australia, like Mexico. We've heard about the differences he expressed about China. Is there a feeling among Australians that we could see some kind of major confrontation come out of all this?
Well, look, certainly let's hope not, and we're hopeful that that doesn't happen. I think, as I said earlier, a lot of President Trump's tweets and remarks have to be seen in a domestic political context. He has to be seen to be doing what he said he would do before the election, and he wants to be seen to be doing things for his core supporters. You know, the so-called the white battlers, if you like, middle-aged males who've lost their jobs in manufacturing industries and who turned away from the Democratic Party to Trump. He has to be seen to be supporting those. It's interesting. There was an opinion poll in Australia just this week that asked Australians whether they thought the travel ban was a good idea, and indeed 48% said yes, and only 40% said no. So I think it's worth highlighting that the domestic voters in various countries, France, Britain, even Australia and other countries, they may well actually be very supportive of some of the things that Trump is doing. I know he's breaking up a lot of, you know, he's smashing a lot of diplomatic niceties, and he's operating in a very different way. But you know, he's not necessarily doing things that aren't in the, you know, that aren't liked by large voting blocs within allied countries, including Australia. Okay. Just on the point of Mexico, I think that.
Go ahead.
Well, there's been a lot of bluster about Mexico paying for this wall, and that there'll be tariffs on Mexico. So far, we haven't actually seen any tariffs imposed. Same with China. Nothing's actually happened yet. I think we really have to look at the deeds, not the words of the Trump administration.
Hey, Gustavo, is that the way it's seen in Mexico as well? We're going to have to see this wall being built. We're going to see whether President Trump imposes any kind of tariffs on Mexican imports?
There's already talks about what to do, because, I mean, obviously one of the main points, and as Adam was saying, he's delivering on the promises that he made during his campaign. President Trump trying to get away from NAFTA, from the free trade agreement between the three countries in North America. Mexico is trying to figure out what's going to do, what's going to happen afterwards. And I think this opens the door for Mexico to get closer to or nearer to Latin America, to the Latin American bloc, if you want. But Mexico hasn't really reacted, or it's very dependent on American. 80% of the exports of Mexico go to the United States and Canada, mostly to the United States. And so Mexico is not accustomed to living without the United States. So in Mexico, the popular sentiment is that President Peña Nieto earned some points when he canceled his visit to the United States on January 31st, but he's still a very unpopular president. So there's this feeling that we're being bullied, we're being used as a prop, just as a piñata, if you want, to score political points.
Fred, is that a risk that President Trump is running, that Mexico could turn to other countries? And let's not forget that when we look at something like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, 4.9 million U.S. jobs depend on that.
The U.S.-Mexico trade relationship is crucial. Our relationship, our friendship, I think it's going to last. I think there's going to be some disruption at the beginning of this administration. It was such a dramatic change from the last administration. Yeah. I think there were mistakes made, and I think that they're going to be corrected. I firmly believe that the U.S.-Mexican relationship will be on good footing very soon.
Trita, you wanted to say something?
I'm not an expert on U.S.-Mexico, but if I could comment on the other thing that was said. Look, it is not surprising that 40+% may actually be supporting this, because they have been under the impression that this is going to increase their security. After hearing all of the fear-mongering that Trump has said, both during his term, both during the campaign as then later on as president, obviously people are yearning for anything that could give them security. If they knew that this is actually really not adding to their security, if they actually understood what was going on, that the way it was implemented, they were handcuffing green card holders, they were actually deporting green card holders who've been living here for 20 years and been law-abiding citizens, I think the numbers would go down dramatically. But after all of this scaremongering, obviously there's going to be a lot of people that will fall for this illusion of security that he's offering through a couple of tweets.
What would you say to those as Fred said right at the beginning of the program, who say President Trump is not behaving like a politician because politicians make promises during the election campaign.
You make a racist, bigoted promise, and then you act on it. I don't understand why that would suddenly be something that people should be praising. Oh, at least he's living up to his promises.
But does that in some way explain the support that he's getting? I mean, it's his support here in the United States.
No, I think the support he's getting is because of many different other factors, and one of them is that he's really simplified the issue of international terrorism, and he's targeted one specific group and made them think that this is all about them. As a result, a lot of people are very afraid. And then he's offering this thing, giving them an illusion of, if most people knew
do you think
that actually zero people, zero nationals from these countries that commit an act of terrorism on U.S. soil, I think a lot of people would be asking questions about this, but because they don't know this, they will fall for this illusion.
Do you think it'll be counterproductive? Because he's isolating entire groups of people here.
He certainly is. I think in the long run, this is not going to stand. And I think the outcry that we've also seen in the United States with people protesting outside of the airports, these marches, is clearly showing that there is a significant amount of opposition to this as well.
Fred, could that action by the president actually increase danger? People actually being isolated? Because the blanket ban, it doesn't single out certain people, it's everybody.
Well, there's an effort here to find a way to vet these refugees. We shouldn't be turning away refugees from any countries if they're women or children or disabled or the elderly. We have to find a way. We're a compassionate nation. There obviously can't be a religious test for refugees.
But there already is a way. The United States is one of the most difficult countries to get in for a refugee. The vetting system has been in place for a long time. It takes 2 years in many instances.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. That timeline was cut back substantially in the final year of Mr. Obama's presidency to get refugees in. I think that many of Trump's voters reacted to this flood of radical Islamist terrorist attacks over the last couple of years in Orlando and in San Bernardino and in Paris and in Brussels. They've seen what's happened in Sweden and Germany, large influxes of refugees who have committed crimes and have overwhelmed these nations. I think this had a significant effect on the electorate that I don't think the Democratic Party was ready for. Mr. Trump moved on this. Now, I agree, a lot of this is homegrown terrorism, but it's being inspired by ISIS. And I have to say, the refugee travel restrictions is not going to stop that. More has to be done to deal with the ideology, radical Islam, that is motivating both ISIS and these homegrown terrorists in the United States and other countries.